Hey, son.
Howdy.
So we started this years ago as an American take on Formula One, promote Formula One in America, cover F1 in America, which I think is still a valid effort, but it's no longer pressing. We are not the center of F1, not yet, but we're more like Caracas. The future of F1 goes through America. All the tech sponsor money, social media companies, Netflix and Apple may be buying the streaming rights, that big Hollywood movie. We've got Drive to Survive coming up, 3 races in the country, including the premier Formula One race on the calendar every year, Las Vegas. And no longer just lowly Haas. The so-called American team will have Ford making engines, Cadillac with the team soon. So I say time to pivot. It's no longer just an American take, but a smart take. The smartest take on Formula One, in fact. Sound good to you, son?
Sounds good to me.
Nice. All right, are you ready to go?
I'm ready to go.
Hello, welcome to Hard Compound, the American take on Formula One, featuring the smart discussion on the sport. Son, still a month away before Melbourne. First race of the year. No race to discuss, not even testing, not really, which means we get to talk about expectations and change. Why don't we start with a bang? Who do we think is going to win in 2025?
That is a bang, right off the bat. Yeah, I mean, it's like you said in the intro here, the sport has grown dramatically in just the few years that we've been doing this podcast here in the States. So much more influence in the sport is coming from America, media companies, people talking about the sport, people interested in the sport, manufacturers. Now we're getting real constructors. I mean, it's grown so much. It's really cool to see.
Yeah, 5 years ago, if you just said, by 2026, Cadillac and Ford will be making engines, Cadillac will have a team, I'd be like, no way, not Formula One.
Yeah, we've had, at least a try for an American in the sport for the first time in, almost a decade. Didn't go all that well, but, there's hope that more will come soon. Hopefully it doesn't take another decade for another American to enter the sport, but it is pretty exciting, the direction that the sport is moving and the influence that America has had on the sport. I guess to answer your big ol' question at the start, who's going to win this season? I got to say, it's hard to bet against Max, right? I mean, he's just incredible, pretty much in the prime of his career right now, or the prime of his driving capabilities, probably. It's hard to say. He kind of keeps his career decisions close to his chest, so we don't know if it's the twilight or just the beginning. We'll see. But it's hard to bet against him. That said, I think there's been a lot of changes among the top 4 teams going into this season. So I guess to lay it all out, right, we've got Hamilton moving into Ferrari, big changes there. We don't really know how that is going to play out. I have a hard time believing that everything's going to be all nice and fun and wonderful at Ferrari. I think there's going to be some clashes between teammates, between drivers and the team. I think it might be a little bit of a tumultuous year at Ferrari, though I think they may be developing one of the top 2 fastest cars. That's my expectation, is that they're going to be fast, but the 2 drivers might take away points from each other, points from the team. And so I find it kind of hard to believe that either one of them is going to kind of run away with any title challenge.
Yeah, real quick, I think that Ferrari should have the best car in 2025. That means Charles, who everyone loves, and Lewis, who everyone loves outside of F1, will be teammates battling it out over the fastest car with the fastest car. But there's going to be some interesting dynamics at play right there. Charles has been the quintessential Ferrari driver. He's very good And it's the team first. And that's what Ferrari wants. And Lewis, whatever you want to say about Lewis Hamilton, good or bad, he's not team first. Okay. And that's going to make it interesting. And Charles is not going to let him come in there and say, "Oh, I'm the best and I'm going to get everything." And he's going to win. I mean, hell, if Leclerc lets Hamilton just walk into Ferrari and beat him, then Leclerc needs to, maybe move to hypercar or something. I don't know.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I think because everything outwardly has been so pleasant, it's hard to get an exact read on what the situation is going to be like. But my assumption, based on, what you kind of described about what we know about the drivers and about the team, is that it's going to be chaotic and fierce. And I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be fun. I think it's going to be a fun year at Ferrari.
Oh, yeah. Well, and before you kind of work your way into who you think will win, see, I think by the end of the year, Red Bull was the fourth best car, but Max is the best driver on the grid, and the car started out very well. So I think a lot of people are going to say, well, Max, but even Max at his very best may still be able to win in the fourth best car. Okay, so who next do we think? Lando, in my opinion. We got Lando Norris. Everyone think, oh, McLaren won. He was so close. But McLaren all year long seemed like they never could figure out why their car was so fast. So I have a feeling they're going to drop back. So I actually think the best cars will be, instead of McLaren Ferrari, it will be Mercedes Ferrari. And as you mentioned, all the stuff going on inside Ferrari, that's going to pin them back a bit on the drivers' championship side. I think Max in the fourth best car, and then George Russell in the fastest car. That's, I think, going to be the 1-2. Just wanted to get ahead of you there.
That's good, because on my notes here written down next, I have Mercedes/Russell to win.
Oh, wow. We did not discuss that before, and I wanted to be the first. So,
So along your lines there, I mean, like we were saying, okay, Ferrari, big changes, inter-team dynamics, I think are going to play a big role in how they fare this season. I do think they will have the best, or as I said, second best car on the grid. Mercedes, they've had a few struggling years. They tend to figure out their issues throughout the season, resolve them, make them better. And for whatever reason, the last few seasons, they've come into the next year, the fourth best car. You go, why? What's going on here? But by the end of the season, they're back in it. And I think Russell, he's been there several years now. He's the guy now. He's got the trust of the team, of Toto, and they've got a rookie coming in. And while I think Kimi Antonelli is a very fine driver, and I think he'll fare perfectly fine in that car, I don't believe he will off the bat challenge Russell in any way. I don't think that's his personality. I don't think that he'll have the grasp of the car right away. So I think Russell currently has the best outlook in terms of teammate, and overall situation than any of the top, 8 drivers.
Nice. Let me throw this curveball at you, because here in America, we're about to have the Super Bowl. The Kansas City Chiefs versus the Philadelphia Eagles. I don't follow football, but I know it's them. I do know that nobody likes those teams. I also know that nobody likes the people in those cities. Nobody likes people from Philadelphia. Nobody likes people from Kansas City. But, if all of America had their way, it would be the Detroit Lions versus the Buffalo Bills. Okay. But it's not. So forget who we think's going to win. Who do you think the fans want to win and or have like a 1-2 battle in 2025?
Oh, I mean, that's got to be the easiest answer is a Norris-Leclerc battle. I mean, I see it's like, the battle of the two young, handsome superstars that all the pretty girls like, I'm like, that's who the fans the general public would want to win.
So
That's my opinion, I guess.
Lando Leclerc. Okay. No, that's good. Because I would have thought it'd be maybe Lewis and Charles. Same team, both Ferrari. Like I said, outside of F1, everyone knows Lewis Hamilton. He's a superstar. Inside of F1, everyone loves Charles Leclerc. Both are Ferrari now. Imagine that, a 1-2 Ferrari. I think people would like that.
Pretty crazy. Yeah, I think people would like that, but I think there's an element of, kind of the underdog element that people really like and like to root for, right? So I think that's why, you mentioned the Lions and the Buffalo Bills, right? It's like, well, everybody wants them in the Super Bowl because those are, kind of the underdogs. Those are the underdog cities, the underdog fans, the underdog teams, and we love to root for them. I think in F1, the guys in the limelight who are kind of the underdogs here, they haven't won a championship. They haven't really even gotten all that close to winning championships, but are among fan favorites are Lando and Charles. I think if people are like, Lewis, he's battling for his 8th championship, like, fuck that guy, right? Like, that's in 21, when Max and Lewis were battling, right? It was kind of like more people wanted Lewis to lose than Max to win, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like that's what I get from sort of Lewis and Max, is like people just don't want them to win.
Now, speaking of fan favorites, I saw this news item, it's NASCAR related. So last year, 2024, Dale Earnhardt Sr. and Dale Earnhardt Jr. both were in the top 10 of like driver fan item sales, like jerseys and so forth. Merchandise. NASCAR is crazy with the merchandising. And the Earnhardts have both been in the top 10 for a long time. Dale Earnhardt Sr. died many years ago. Dale Earnhardt Jr. has been out of the sport for years, but they're still among the top 10 in fan items sales. Who do you think, let's say 10 years from now, 20 years from now, in this group would still be selling F1 merchandise?
That's interesting. I mean, anytime you think about F1 and sort of the driver legacies, you immediately think of guys like Senna and Schumacher, right? Somebody that has sort of permanently changed the sport and who many consider to be the best driver of all time, right? And so if you're thinking about guys on the grid now who fit into either of those categories, I think Lewis clearly is in that category as, someone who may be considered one of, if not the best of all time, holds a lot of records, and quite frankly has changed the sport in a variety of ways. And other guys on the grid, you would then think of Max, right? Somebody who clearly appears to be on the track to be one of the greats. I'm kind of trying to think of other guys on the grid who fit into those categories. And I'm not really thinking of anybody, Lando and Charles, I think everybody kind of adores now, but right now they don't seem to be leaving this lasting legacy, right?
Right.
Even a guy like Alonso, right? It's like people sort of seem to have already forgotten what he accomplished earlier on in his career.
Man.
He's been in the sport for so long. He's incredible. I think just the way he's adapted to all of the changes throughout the years and remained one of the best drivers is incredible. But I don't think that really sticks out to people. It's sort of like wins and championships, and then, you're some outspoken person like Senna was, that sort of permanently alters the trajectory of the sport, right?
Now, I'm going to take a different view because I think Alonso will be. I think, for starters, it will be Max, because I think Max is going to go down as one of the greatest drivers ever. And I think a lot of people will consider him the greatest driver ever in F1. I think Alonso, he's like Michigan's Fab Five. it's like he's great, but the sort of eternal greatness eluded him in part through circumstances beyond his control. And I think his abilities, his wins and championships, driving for essentially 2+ generations and in multiple generations of cars, engines, aerodynamic setups, and then just sort of having certain things elude him. I think that story will make him one of the best. I actually think Lewis Hamilton will not be. To me, he's like AJ Foyt, IndyCar, just one of the all-time best, but we don't really think about him. It's sort of like, I think there's going to be a knock on him that he was in the best car for longer than anyone has ever had the best car. So we'll see. Now, our Dirty Air segment. The FIA announced changes to the flexi wings. I don't want to get too technical, but they're basically saying all that work some of you teams have been doing on your flexi wings, at some point in the year, we're not going to allow it anymore. And we know there's a hard cost cap, but screw you. Now, some people think this is just a conspiracy to keep Max from winning again. I don't know. I think it's internal squabbles over how rules are interpreted, who has unfair advantages or not, who's always trying to seek something that's just right at the edge of the rules, But I just want to get your thoughts on that. Do we think their FIA is trying to keep Max from winning again, or this is just a legitimate technical ruling, whether you agree with it or not?
I think this is not something that has anything to do with Max. I think there have been previous mandates that were sort of intended to keep a driver or team from being overly dominant in the past, whether that was Max or Lewis. There have been discussions of those. This in particular, I don't think has anything to do with that. McLaren and Alpine both skirted the rules to some extent with their sort of flex wings that they developed for last year. And people got a little bit, upset about that. Personally, I think some of these rule changes are a bit of an overreach from the FIA. My personal opinion is that, look, we want people to be figuring out the best solution while just staying within the rules, right? How exactly they're written. Maybe there's little tiny loopholes that you can figure out. I think that's great. I think that teams should do that. So I kind of like the flex wing. If you didn't think about it, well, that's your fucking fault. That's why we're better than you, right? I think it's an overreach to stop something from happening simply because other teams didn't think about it, right? That's also the same. Simply because teams don't have Max, well, we're not going to slow down Red Bull. He's just, why would we do that? That's dumb. But yeah, in terms of this particular change, I don't think it has anything to do with Max. I think it's just a bunch of teams complained because they weren't as fast as McLaren. And that's sort of the end of it.
Who do you think is going to get more wins this year? Or I'll do more points. Charles or Lewis?
Ooh, I kind of think Charles will, but it's tough. I think there's going to be a lot of close battles. I think they're going to clash a few times. I think Charles will start out the season more sort of in control. And then as Lewis sort of gains confidence in that car, he'll probably take it to Charles a little bit towards the end of the season. So we'll see how it plays out late in the season, but I think Charles will just edge out Lewis this year.
Interesting, because as I alluded earlier, I don't think it's going to be close. Now, barring some unforeseen issue like an injury or multiple DNFs that are not his fault, I think Charles is going to handily beat Lewis. And I will be very disappointed because Charles Leclerc, look, he's battling Max Verstappen, who I think one of the handful of greatest drivers of all time. But no, he didn't win. But man, he put in the work in 2024. He was awesome. And he's now, this will be his, what, sixth, seventh year at Ferrari? I mean, he moved pretty quick into that Ferrari seat when he was young. I know Lewis Hamilton is one of the all-time greats. This is the twilight of his career. If it's close, I think that's an indictment on Charles. So,
Yeah, but I mean, if let's say it was Alonso at Ferrari instead of Lewis, what would you say? Oh, it's twilight of Alonso's career too, right? Is Charles
it has been for
wiping the
10
floor
years.
with him? I don't think like that's an excuse to say, "Oh, Lewis isn't good anymore," right?
No, I don't think it's not that Lewis isn't good anymore or Alonso isn't good anymore. I just think Charles was great last year. It just, his greatness just didn't match Max's. But he was great, and he's been in that car for years. And this is not the 2026 new regulations. Okay, this will be effectively a minor evolution in the car and the team that he's been with for years. I will be very disappointed if it's not just a clear victory. So,
Okay, another hypothetical. Let's say he and Ferrari win the driver and constructors championship, but Lewis is like a handful of points behind him. Like it's close. They battle it out to the last race, but he wins a championship. Is it still a disappointing season?
well, not for them. But no, I mean, maybe Ferrari has the fastest car, and it's clearly the fastest car, and it's Charles, Lewis 1-2. Fair enough. I mean, not that I don't think it's Lewis Bottas, but Charles, I will be disappointed. Like I said, I know Lewis still has the greatness in him, but dang, this is his car, this is his team. And he put in the work in 2024. So
Yeah, I
if
don't know.
Lewis makes that close, I'm going to be, dang, Lewis is still one of the all-time greats. I mean, he is, but he's still driving at that level. And my opinion of Charles will be diminished.
I just think because for me, if Ferrari actually does put out a good car, right, puts out something that absolutely from the start of the season can compete for a championship, I think that sort of gives Hamilton the impetus to return to his like greatest form, right? I think the last few seasons at Mercedes, he just was like, well, we're not going to fucking win anyways, so I'm phoning it in. But we know that if he's got a championship battle on his hand, he will claw tooth and nail. He's like Max in that way. I mean, he will not allow anybody to best him without taking part of them with him, right? And I think if he returns to that form, it is not going to be straightforward for Leclerc, however well he's driving, to just simply breeze past him.
Switching to the soft compound, big breaking news. Very reliable rumors that Netflix is going to buy the streaming rights to Formula One, at least in America. This is huge. I mean, I can't really fault F1 if they make this deal. Here in the US, F1 races are almost exclusively shown on ESPN. You have to buy a cable package to get ESPN. It's not broadcast. ESPN pays about $90 million a year for those rights. Netflix spent almost double that just to make that short Senna miniseries. I mean, they've got to be saying this is a steal. F1 is still so undervalued in the US. Now, I do think for those of us hardcore fans, we have F1 TV. I love F1 TV. It's awesome. They got F1 TV Kids. They've got a great race coverage, post-race coverage. They show all the interviews before the race and after, but they do lack a lot of content. I mean, there's a lot of, they'll show old races. They'll show some Formula 2 stuff, but a lot of the fun content, driver behind the scenes, the Drive to Survive type stuff, We really don't get that. Netflix is just great at that. So I think this could be just such a win for the sport and for the fans. Now, I will absolutely miss the Sky Sports feed because ESPN, which pays a pittance for the rights, doesn't even have its own coverage. It just gets the Sky Sports feed. But Sky Sports, I think, does a great job. Martin Runnell's great. They have Danica Patrick. Their pre-race and race coverage is so great. I'll miss that, but this just seems like a win-win, don't you think?
Well, I'll say this. Netflix live streaming is fucking terrible. They're really, really awful. Obviously, they're a streaming platform at this point, but they don't live stream. Whenever they've live streamed sporting events, say Christmas Day football games, they have had tons of problems, technical issues, whatever. That will be frustrating. I think after, say, half a season, hopefully less, they would iron that out, figure it out. But I don't know. So that to me is already, a little negative there.
So I don't get Netflix. So I didn't realize that. Okay.
I read about how terrible their live streaming coverage is. But I have also heard that they do a really good job in terms of like coverage. So, the hosts that they get, the actual footage is very good. It's just that their actual streaming is subpar. So if they can figure out those types of things, they'll probably put together some really good content, like you were saying and sort of hoping for, which I think would be great if we get, more inside looks, if there's different sort of camera feeds, if they get the right people to host and cover these races, that would be really, really cool, really fun. I'm sure they could get some really good names to host. So it would be interesting to see.
I've long been predicting Apple would buy the streaming rights. They're putting all the money behind that big Brad Pitt F1 movie. They bought MLS streaming rights. They see like the value of the F1 fan in America and around the world. So, but I'll take it. I'll take Netflix. So I think that'll be good. Now, there's a quick question because I saw a short interview by Adrian Newey. Oh, wait, a funny story. There's this guy on Twitter, F1J, and he was talking about his little girl. And she said, Verstappen is awesome. Apparently, he makes his little girl watch F1, which I think is a sign of good parenting.
Yeah.
Says Verstappen is awesome, but Lewis wants the world to be a better place. So I like Lewis Hamilton better, which is a nice sentiment. But I'm pretty sure all of the drivers want the world to be a better place. Not just Lewis Hamilton, of course. But then I thought, you know what? I bet Ocon doesn't. Ocon is our anti-hero.
I think Ocon just wants to see everything burn.
Right. He's an anti-hero.
He's a villain. I don't think he's an anti-hero. I think he's just a villain. He's like Goldfinger, I don't know.
Funny. So Adrian Newey got signed by Aston Martin to just truckload of money he's going to be making to helping them design their car. I think the man is sandbagging already. I think he's like he's got a foot already into retirement while he's taking that big giant Aston Martin paycheck. Because in this very brief interview, he was talking about how bad the Red Bull car had gotten, that only because Max is so great did it mask a lot of the faults of the car. But he seemed to be, I don't say eager to blame others, but he didn't shy away from letting other people take the blame for that. And then he started talking about how in the upcoming new regulations, it's all going to be about the power unit. And he's like an aerodynamics god, apparently. And I'm like, this dude is sandbagging. I mean, do you think this is just innocuous, just a little brief interview, or does he have something up his sleeve, or is he pretty much calling it a day?
I imagine that he's just taking a paycheck and putting his feet up. I mean, he can say whatever he wants about the Red Bull car, but for Aston, right, they're paying him a ton of money. he's probably going on like, I don't think that I can simply make this vehicle incredible. I, counter to what many people believe, don't think Adrian Newey is some sort of god. I don't think he alone made Red Bull incredible. And I do not believe he alone will make Aston, amazing. And I think he is just letting people know if he does not turn Aston around, it's not his fault,
Right.
Look, there's nothing I can do. It's not an aerodynamics problem, which may be somewhat true, but everything works together in the car, right? I mean, there's things that maybe are more important, but not by a lot. I think he's just not as good as everybody believes. He's very smart. He's done a lot of good work. True, but he's not Midas,
Right. Right.
Like,
Right. He's not going to turn it.
so he's just sort of putting it out there to, I don't want to say save face, but like to tell the truth. Like, hey, I'm not just gonna make everything perfect all of a sudden, right?
I think you probably have it correct because I'm thinking, man, is this old man sandbagging? It's like, here, Adrian, come to our team. Here's $100 million check. What are you going to do for us? And he's like, well, these new regulations, there's not much I can do. I'm like, well, bitch, give the money back. But he's not at all going to give the money back. But maybe you're right where it's like, hey, man, I'm the best there is at this. But this aerodynamics is limited. It's not going to save you. So, and then the other part about just how bad the Red Bull car had gotten, I was like, you know what? We slandered poor Sergio Perez for 2 years. And I think there was some validity to it. But maybe that car was just so bad, It would be nice to see Sergio. I don't want him back in F1. There's all these rumors. Cadillac wants to hire him as their F1 driver in 2026. But I would appreciate a Sergio Perez redemption story.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how valid the Red Bull slander is, right? I get if it's, of those top 4, it's the 4th best car. But these are hundredths or thousandths of a second that we're talking about, right? It's not like it's some wild horse that you're trying to tame. It's a car. All of these F1 cars are similar in many respects. They have their quirks, but all of the drivers are capable of driving any of them. Max, I think, can push anything to its absolute limits and keep it all together, whereas other drivers, have to pull back in one region or the other. But I mean, it's not like, oh, this car actually was the 10th best car on the grid. Like, it wasn't. That's not true. So for Perez to be as far back of the other 7 drivers, at the top, he needed to do better. That said, redemptions are kind of fun to watch. So if somehow Yuki gets booted for his antics and Perez comes back in and does incredible and he just is scything through the field, that would be kind of cool to see.
Across the line, that's our segment where we predict the top 5 for the next race. The next race is in Melbourne, but not until middle of March or so. So, no prediction in this episode. However, we will talk about fan predictions. Touched on this earlier in the episode. Fan voting, who's going to win? Who will win the Drivers' Championship in 2025? On the F1.com site, Formula1.com, 29% said Max. I can see that. 22% said Lando. 29% said Lewis Hamilton. What are these people thinking? I mean, Charles had 9%. I mean, this, like I said, if Lewis handily beats Charles, then I think Charles should just leave. I mean, I get it. Look, it's Lewis Hamilton, one of the all-time greats. But one of the all-time greats, he's almost 40. He's just joined the team. I don't know. This still bothers me. This is obviously a point of irritation. What do you think? 29% Max, 29% Lewis, 22% Lando.
Yeah,
Charles is down at 9. No George. I mean, he's just way.
Maybe that answers your question earlier of who do the fans want to win. I guess Max and Lewis is who they want. To be fair, that was a fun battle that we got back in 21. So I wouldn't be upset if that was the battle we got again, because these are two ultra competitors. And I think the two drivers on the grid who we know won't back down. I don't know. To your point, though, I think there's two drivers, Leclerc and Piastri, that absolutely have to be in the conversation throughout the season. If they're not, then, I think hope mostly is lost on those drivers. And they'll just, sort of fade from F1 lore.
Now, not really a point of discussion here, but there's a guy on Twitter named Blake, claims to be a former F1 engineer, and he went on a rant about the spending cap. He is no longer in F1, but he claims that he made more in 2024 as a part-time performance engineer in the WEC World Endurance Championship Series than the maximum F1 race engineer is making, which is shocking to me because F1 should absolutely be the pinnacle of the sport, not just with drivers or cars, but the entire paddock. I, from the very beginning, have been a big believer in the spending cap. I think it's going to bring equity across the teams, ultimately. I think it's going to bunch the racing up better. I think it's going to allow the sport valuation to grow, which will make the sport even better. They are following the NFL playbook. But I have a feeling the spending cap is set way too low. I have a feeling that they've allowed teams like Haas say it can't be any higher than, X. It's like, no, you're going to have to spend more. You have to get more sponsors. You're going to have to put more in the team or just get out. I don't know. What do you think of that? Because it seems to me that there's way more money in this sport than the spending cap justifies. I'm a big believer in the spending cap, but it's got to be sort of, equitable.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think the spending cap is good overall for F1. I like the idea. I just think that maybe actual spending regulations need to be written out clearer. Is there a certain salary that needs to be kind of a minimum? It's hard to say. I mean, people working in this sport should be compensated fairly, appropriately, right? I mean, Ferrari's giving Lewis Hamilton like $100 million, right? The engineers there that are developing these cars and allowing the drivers to be on track should also be compensated appropriately, right? And the spending cap needs to probably be revised to allow for that to happen, right? Otherwise, who the fuck's going to want to work in F1 when they can work in a different motorsporting series and earn more? It doesn't make sense.
Any crazy predictions, Patrick, for the season, for Melbourne, for F1?
I have a couple of interesting and probably crazy predictions. One of them is that, well, we've seen over the last several years a rise in the popularity of sim racing. And a lot of that is due to some of the drivers' support and interest in sim racing. So I think Max and Lando are going to team up to start their own sim racing league this year, probably during the summer break.
Oh, that's a good idea. I heard there's like some sort of Tiger Woods, Rory McIlroy league in golf.
Yeah, it's weird. It's all indoors and stuff. Yeah.
So a Max Lando, that would be cool. And these probably real sims are getting, more within reach. That's a good one.
Yeah. So I think that definitely could happen and could be profitable. And I think for people who are fans of the sport or just fans of sim racing, could get involved in these kinds of things and would be sort of a cool thing to do. My other more crazy prediction has to do with tires. So Pirelli currently is the sole provider of Formula One tires. Their contract runs through 2027, but F1 is trying to be a little bit more, shall we say, eco-conscious. So I think at the end of 2027, Pirelli will no longer be the sole provider of Formula One tires. I think there will be regional tire providers. For example, Pirelli will be a European and sort of Middle East tire provider. I believe all the F1 tires that Pirelli produces are manufactured in Turkey. But then, say, Bridgestone would be the Asia tire provider, as they're based in Japan. For the Americas, Goodyear would be the tire provider.
That's a good one. Yeah. Because it as you said, they're trying to be more eco-conscious. It's better to have 3 sponsors, even if they're paying the same, because, they're always trying to outdo each other. And then when contract negotiations come up, you got everybody's fighting to stay in. That's
But
a really good
I
one.
think this would be really interesting for teams to have to adjust to, right? I mean,
Yep.
there would maybe have to be several sort of testing sessions with all these different tires, slightly different compounds, whatever they might be.
That's a good one.
I think it would provide some interesting dynamics in the sport.
Nice. I have a couple predictions, both involving Fernando Alonso. One is Max semi-jokingly said he wanted to do 24 hours of Le Mans, and he wanted Fernando to be his teammate. And I think that's going to happen. I think both of them now are like, yeah, we have to make this happen. Boom, it's done. My second involves Fernando Alonso because a couple of years ago, I think it was, I predicted that there would be a Champions League or a seniors tour like they have in golf. And it's like, there's not 24 races. It could be 10 races a year. Maybe it's just all in Europe and Middle East. But it's the old guys. It'll be Lewis Hamilton, Fernando. We'll bring back Kimi Raikkonen, Vettel. We'll bring back there might be a couple old retired Indy guys, who maybe had a brief shot in F1 like Ericsson. And I think fans would love that. And I saw there was like a NASCAR Legends race recently. So I don't think they have a tour, but so I believe there's going to be an F1 Champions Tour Seniors League by the late 2020s. All right. I want to thank you all for listening to everybody's most beloved father and son F1 podcast. It is much appreciated. And we are lights out.
See ya. Thanks for listening.
You just finished listening to Hard Compound, recorded in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and around the world.